Welcome, and in this tutorial we're going to build a REST API for Laravel application. So let's begin. The first step, it will be a creation of new Laravel application. So let's do this. I'm going to do this by using composer command. You can use Laravel CLI, but I'm going to use composer as I said. So composer creates a project Laravel, and now let's type folder of my project, and it will be named REST API Laravel. Okay, so now let's wait until everything will be successfully installed, and after that let's open our folder with this project and let's begin development of our API for Laravel application. Okay, so as you can see, this project is successfully generated, so that means that we can now go to folder of this project and open Visual Studio Code. Okay, so as you can see, I'm now in Visual Studio Code, and now let's begin with the basics of the creation API for the Laravel application. And first let's go to the roads folder and let me show you files that is named api.php. Here you can create all roads that you want to have in your. So here we're gonna create all roads, and I'm going to show you how we can return JSON data or data in other formats. But for now, let's open a new window in our terminal and let's create a new controller that will be named, for example, controller post controller, and let's make this controller as resource. So let's type here resource. Okay, I forget to type artisan correctly, so let's fix it. Okay, so as you can see, post controller successfully created, and in this tutorial we're going to work with resources. So as you can see, I created a resource controller that will be for post models that we are going to create soon. So as you can see, we have functions that are created by default. Also, we are going to create a custom request for store or, for example, for update. And also we are going to talk about Sanctum, how we can use this in your application if you want to make authorization by using API that you created. So now let's create a new model that will be named, for example, PHP artisan model, make model, post, and let's create here model and factory. So here I'm going to type mf flag. Okay, so as you can see, post model successfully created, post factory also successfully created, and create a post table. So now let's open this migration and let's imagine that every post will have, for example, title. And as you know, when you're creating a new Laravel application, by default you already have user model. So let's add here this model. So because we're creating posts, so every post will have relation between users models. So every post will have field that will be named user ID. So let's create here for agent ID 4, and so yeah, let's type here user ID, but let's type here user class. So we're going to create a relation between these two models, between post model and user model. So users will have some posts that was created by this user, and every post will belong to some user. Okay, so now let's continue creation of the post table. So let's imagine that our posts will have body, and maybe that's all that we need for now. Okay, so now we can go to the post controller, and here we will need to use this model that is named post. Okay, so let's type here app models post. But before we're gonna start writing code for this controller, let's go to the post model. And as I said, let's create here a new relation. So let's import here first user model, and let's create a new relation that will be named, for example, author. So as I said, every post have author. That's why we created here user ID field. Okay. So let's type here this belongs to. So as I said, every post belongs to some user, so belongs to user class. And now let's go to the user model and let's create here. Let's first import here post model. So use app models post, and here let's create a relation that will be named post. And by using this relation, we're going to get post that was created by some author. So let's type here return this has many, so some user can have many posts. So for example, has many post class, and yeah, that's all. So has many posts. So we successfully created relations between these two models. And that's all that we need for now. So now we can go to the post controller and close migration file. Also soon I'm going to configure my .env file for database connection, but for now let's continue writing code. So as I said, in this course we're creating some API. Also we're going to talk about what is resources in your application. But for now let's imagine that we want to return all posts. So to return all posts we can just say return post all, and we can go to API. And yeah, also I want to say that this is not correct solution, and soon I'm gonna show you how it's correct way to return all data in your application, some collection data in your API. So let's import here post controller. So let's type here app http controllers, and let's import post controller as I said. And let's imagine that we will have a new route for this controller. As I said, we created here resource controller, so that means that we can use here resource function that will create automatically routes for these all functions. Okay, so let's just type here posts. Okay, and we can just type here post controller class. Okay, so that means that we can start but no, first let's configure our factory for post. So let's go here and let's imagine that for now, so maybe it's better to say that when we are creating a new post by using our factory, for example in database seeder, yeah, so we're gonna go to this file, we are going to create automatically for every post a new user. So let's type here just factory, user factory, create. And now let's create here title. So for example, fake, we can type here that it will return 5 fake words, and body also will return, for example, maybe 10 fake words. Okay, so we will need to configure our post factory because we are going to use this in database seeder to create a dummy data for our API. So let's go here and we can here import post model, and let's go here. Now let's type here post factory. Let's imagine that we want to create 10 posts, and let's type here create. So it will also create 10 users because, as I said, when we are creating now a new post by using our post factory, it will automatically create a new user for this post to fill user ID field. Okay, so now let's go to .env file and let me configure my database connection. So my DB password is root and my database is Laravel REST API, and let me also configure here port. Yeah, also I can use this field, but I want to configure this here. Let me to create this database, and after that we're going to run migrations with Seeder. Okay, so I successfully created a new database from this application. So now let's run php artisan migrate fresh, and let's add here seed flag because I want to also use our database seeder. So I think that everything will be fine. So let's type this. And as you can see, we have some error, array to string conversion. So looks like I have some trouble maybe in my, so this is in database seeder. So let's go here. And I think this is in post factory. So looks like, so let's first type here just ID, for example, for 1. And let's try to see this again. And as you can see, this is problem with ports. So maybe we can just type here text, for example, 10 and text 50. Let's run this again, and as you can see, a column is not found. Unknown column in title sitting database. So looks like I have some trouble with my. Okay, I type it here text, so let's fix it. So title, and let's run our migration again. So as you can see now everything's works. So if I open my phpMyAdmin and let's go here, let's refresh it. Let's wait until everything will be refreshed. And as you can see, everything's created successfully. So as you can see, we have 10 users and 10 posts. As I said, when we're creating now a new post by using post factory, it will create automatically a new user. So if I go to post, you can see here we have some data, and if you go to users, we also have some automatically generated data. Okay, so this is fine. And Now the main question. Okay, so we created a first row there. Maybe it's better to say that we created now code for index function. So how we can check this? For this course, for this tutorial, you can use tool that is named Postman. That's a really great tool if you want to check your API. But if you don't have Postman, you can just, type php artisan and serve. Oh, okay, php artisan server. And let's open this address in our browser. Let's go here, and for example, if I go now API posts, you will see that all data that I type it in post controller is returned automatically in JSON format. So that's one of the ways how you can check your results in this course, but it's better to use Postman. So if you don't know what is Postman, you can just find this and install. So you can type here Postman API and install this application. And soon I'm gonna open Postman and show you how we can use this to test your API. Okay, as I said, this is not correct way to return collection data in your API endpoint. To do this correctly, you will need to create a new resource class. So what is resources and how we can use them? So first let's create a new resource and it will be named post resource. Yep. So now let's go to the resources folder. As you can see, it's automatically created here because we type it here php artisan make resource command. Open this, and here we can define rules, which data will be returned and how we can filter this data. So for example, if I want to return title of the post, I'm going to type here this title. So it will be returned, everything will be returned in JSON format, and this also will type the current title of the current post. Yeah, so now let's return body. So I'm going to type body. And for example, if I want to find user that created this post, I can type, for example, user ID and type, for example, user find this user ID, or it's better to use relations that we created. So I'm going to type here this author, or we can just use this by this way, and let's save it. And now let's open our controller and let's type that I want to use PHP app HTTP resources post resource. Yeah, and if I want to return collection data from our post model, I'm going to use here collection method. So this is the correct way of returning data from the API endpoint. And as you can see, first I configured how this collection must return data. So we just returning here actual information, but here we will return not user ID. We're going to return data of the user record from the database based on user ID that created this post. Okay, so that's all. So now let's open browser and let's refresh it. And as you can see, we have user ID 0, but title is here and also body is here, and you can see that we defined which roles must be returned. So we can use resources, for example, if you want to define which model, which fields will be returned in this endpoint, because you can see that here is no created add field or ID field. We just returning user ID, title and body field. But I have some error with my user ID field, so we can just back here. You can also create a custom field. So for example, I can just type here user. I can use here again my relation, and let's open browser and let's refresh it. And as you can see, now this returning object, and I can maybe I need to type here author first. Okay, and let's refresh it. And okay, I see we have some trouble. Maybe I can of the author of the post, and as you can see, and the undefined property belongs to. So okay, so let's open our post relation to author, so belongs to. Yeah, maybe let's try to use here get function. And let's open browser again, let's refresh it, and this returns empty array. So I think this is trouble with our relations that we created here. So maybe we can type here belongs to user ID, and let's try to refresh this again. And as you can see, now everything works fine. So I forget to configure my field. So here you will need to type field that is like a key between that is like a key that says which user created this post. So type here user ID as we did this in post migration. So as you can see here we have user ID field. Okay, so that's the way how you can use columns. So for example, if you want to define which fields must return your API endpoint in some collection data, you will need to use resources. So now let's move on. So I said that in this tutorial you can use Postman because it's better to use this application if you want to preview results of your Laravel API and also if you want to make some requests. Because in this tutorial I'm going to use this application because to make post requests or patch requests or delete requests, and also show you other things that you can use So now let's make a request to API, so to our API. So let's type here API post and it will be get request. So I have nothing in headers, default headers, so let's type here send. And as you can see, when you're using Postman, it's really nice because you can see all data is really nice structured. So as you can see, we have user data structured, and we can preview all posts that we have here. Okay, so now let's get back to Visual Studio Code, and we need to create a new resource for user model. So let's do this. But before we're gonna do this, let's also make that, let's fix here ID field. So let's type here that our post resource will also return ID field. Okay, so now let's open terminal and let's type php make resource, php make resource, user resource, and let's define which fields will return this resource. So for example, I want to get data about current users. It will be ID of current users, it will be name of current user. So let's type here name and also email, and that's all that I need. So let's type here email. Okay, and I said that you can use collection method if you want to return some array of data. So for example, if I want to get all posts that I have, I will use a collection method. But if I want to return single data, for example, one single post or user record from my database and use some resource that I created, I will need to use I will need to create a new object of the user resource. So as you remember, here we are returning user data, yeah? So user by using relations that we created. And first let's get here user resource. So let's type here http resources user resource. So I specially created this user resource because I want to return only fields that I defined in user resource. So let's type here new user resource, and this is the correct way how you can return data of single user of single record by using some resource that you created. So we type it here user resource. So remember that you will need to use resources if you want to define, for example, which fields must return some endpoint or some model. Okay, so now let's open Postman. Let's go to Postman. And now let's make this request again. As you can see, we have some error. Property ID does not exist on this collection instance. And maybe this is trouble with... Okay, so I think let's open this again. And maybe we can type here just array 0. Because you remember that was returning array first, and after that single user record. So let's try this again. So let's open Postman. And now let's make this request again. And as you can see, now everything works successfully. So remember, you will need to use resources if you want to define which model must return some fields in API, or you can also use this in web roads if you want. We just created two roads, two resources, one for user and one for posts. Now let's talk how we can create a post request and how we can use this in validation and how we can create other functions for our post controller. Okay, so we successfully created two resources for post model and also for user model. So now it's time to talk about storing data that will be created by post request. So first let's create a new request that will be named store post request, and also we can add here model post. Okay, so okay, forget. Okay, so we created store post request, and we're going to use this request here. So let's import this request, and we're going to type here app http requests store post request. And inside this request, we are going to type rules of validation of data that will be in this request. Here we need to type true by default in authorize function, and let's go to rules. So as you already know, we have the fields in our validation in our posts table, and this is user ID field, this is title field, and body. So now let's define that user ID is required. Also we can use here unique or exist validation rule, but I'm going to just type here required. Title, this is string and this is required, and body, this is also string and this is required. So this is validation rules for storing a new post in our database. Okay, so let's get here validated data. So we can just type here request validated, and it's gonna get validated data after we perform this request in store function. And now we can just type post create data, and we can return single post that we successfully created. And to do that, we're going to use post request that I already created. So I'm going to type here new post resource. As I said, you need to use this definition of new post resource if you want to show only data of one single record. Yeah. So for example, if you have collection or array of data, you will need to use post collection function. Okay, and let's type here. Maybe it's better to save this in variable named post, and let's type here return new post resource. So it will return our post that was successfully created and in JSON format with all fields that we defined in post resource. Okay, so maybe that's all, because we don't need to define some roads for this, because as you already know, I created here resource road for posts and for this post controller. Okay, so maybe that's all. So let's go now to Postman and let's try to perform this request. So to do that, we need to change this to post request. After that, we go to body tab and we need to type here row, and I can open this. And for example, let's imagine that user that created this post will be user with ID 1. After that, I can type here title of the post, and it will be test a new post. And yeah, also I forget one important thing. Let's go to headers and let's type here content type, and it will be application JSON because we want to send data in JSON format and also gets data in JSON. So accept application JSON. This means that we want to return data to send data in JSON format, as we're doing this in body tab. So now let's define value of the body field, and let's type here, for example, testing a post request to our API controller. Okay, and now let's click on send button, and as you can see, add user ID to fillable properties. So that means that I need to define fillable fields in post model. So let's go to post model, and I can use here fillable if I want, fillable variable, but I'm going to just type here guarded, and it will automatically allow to fill me all fields that I have in this post table. Okay, so let's get back to Postman and let's send this request again. And as you can see, this post successfully created, and this returns data. This data was automatically created by our post resource. And as you can see, we have ID, we have users that created this post with ID 1. So as you remember, I did that in post resource. We have user field that returns information about user who created this post, not only ID. So as you can see, ID 1 and user that created this ID, this is user 1, and name Vincent Flatley. Okay, and title, test a new post, body, testing a new post. So for example, now if I will try to make a get request to this endpoint, you will see that there we have this post that we just created. So this is the way how you can perform your posts, how you can perform post requests, and this is how your API can handle this. Remember to create a separate request classes. It's really important and nice thing if you want to make a good structure and readable code. Now let's move on and let's finish all functions of our controller. Because we are building API, we don't need functions like create in our controller, so we can just delete this function. And now let's move on to show. And here we can change this not to ID, we can just type here post. So it will be variable of post class, and we can just type here post and return new post resource post. Okay, and edit, we also don't need this function because we are building API, and so we need to finish update and destroy function. So how we can create a update function? First, let's create a new request for updating post. So let's type here update post request, and let's open this request and let's type here true. And here we can just copy rules from the post resource. Okay, so let's type here post resource, and oh no, I mean from store post request, not from post resource. Okay, yeah, okay, great. So that what we will need to define, but I think that here we can just type, yeah, so we don't need maybe user ID, but yeah, so let's leave this field because I want to, maybe we will need to have functionality where we can change author of the post. So let's finish it and let's import now this request. Somebody can say that we can just use here store post request in update, and this will be also true. But in this tutorial, I'm going to use a separate request for this function. And here, let's create a post. Okay. So first, let's get validated data as we did in store function. So let's type here request validated. So we're getting validated data, and after that, we can just type post update data. And after that, we will return by post resource this post that was updated. So we type here return new post resource post. And final function, this is destroy. So we can here also type post, and we can just type here post destroy, or maybe delete function. I don't remember good. So delete, yeah. And here we just can send empty array. Okay, so I think that's all. So now we can test all these functions. So let's first test show function. So let's go to Postman. Let's open Postman, and first let's perform request. That will be get request API post, and this will call show function. So let's send this request, and as you can see, I get posts that have ID 1, and I can now get posts that have ID 5. And as you can see, this is successfully working. Okay, now let's try to, for example, update this post. We can use here put or patch request type, but I prefer to use put. So for example, I want to change user ID of this post, so it will be user ID 3, and we can type here title, maybe it will be test a new title, update a body of post. And let's send this request. As you can see, this post successfully created. So that means if I try to get now this post that have ID 5, I will see that this data is updated. So our update function successfully working. And now the final function, this is delete that we created, and we don't need here any arguments in body. So we can just type here delete request and ID of the post that we want to delete. So let's type here, and as you can see, this returns to us empty array. So that means that if I now try to get post with ID 5, I will get that there is no any post with ID 5. And if I go to posts, and if I scroll down, you can see that we don't have any more post with ID 5. So as you can see, we successfully created all functions that we need in our post control. And that was really simple example how you can, create your API. It's not really hard, and now I want to show you how you can make authorization and how this works in Laravel. To do that, we're going to use Laravel Sanctum. This is a package that is automatically installed in every Laravel application in newest versions, and this package is used to make authorization in your API of your Laravel application. If you open our api.php file, you will see that here we have some by default created route that have user/that username, and this returns information about user, but you can see that here is used out Sanctum middleware. Why here you can see this middleware? That's because this route is only for authorized user. So this middleware will check your request that you added authorization token in your post request or maybe get request to make authorization by your API. So maybe it's better to show you how this works. So let's create here a new, make new controller that will be named out controller. So let's type here out controller, and let's open this controller, and inside this controller let's create here a new function that will be named login, and we will have here request. So let's type here request, and we are going to generate a new authorization token. We will need to use this token to make authorization by API, by using API. And how this works, I'm going to show you when we're gonna finish this function. So first let's import here out facade, and let's get validation data, or maybe we can do this without any validation. Let's try to make here attempt to login, so we can type here attempt request, and we can type here only email and password. Okay, and if validation is successful, we're going to return a new out token that we will use in our API to be authorized in middlewares where is used out Sanctum. This is for security for only logged in users. So the most simple way to create a new token that you can find also this code in official documentation of Laravel. This is to call request user, create a token, and here you can type name of your token. So I will name this like a main, and I will just return here token. And yes, that's all. Now let's create here a new middleware, a new route for this function. So first let's import this controller, out controller. So let's type here controllers, out controller, and let's create here a post endpoint name login, and here we are going to call out controller and login functions that we just created. Okay, so maybe that's all that we need for now. Let's open Postman and let's try to perform this request. So by default, when you creating a new user using user factory in your database seeder, all passwords will be password. So that means that here I will need to create here post request, and my email, it will be, for example, this email. Let's copy this. So let's use this account for authorizing. So Casey Conroy, and let's type here password, and password is equal to password. And let's try to send this request. As you can see, access token successfully created, and now we can use this token to access user endpoint. So let's type here API user, and as you can see, I get unauthenticated. That's because I need to add authorization here. So I can type here, for example, basic out, or for example, we can type here API token or BRR token. But in this, in this tutorial, we are going to use BRR token because we get this from request. And if I now send this request with my authorization header, I will get information about this user because I am successfully authorized. So that's how you can create the out tokens and use this with Laravel Sanctum. But I think it's better to make another example how this works. So now you know that you can use out Sanctum middleware if you want to make some routes only for authorized users. Because to enter road where you need to be authorized, you will need to add authorization be a rare token, as we did this in previous example. So let's imagine that we want to make our post endpoint accessible only for users that are authorized on our website. But also we are going to use this by using API, as you remember. Okay, so first let's use here middleware of Sanctum. So you will need just to type here Sanctum, and let's create here new group of roads. So let's type here group function, and let's save this. Okay, so that's all. And we can also create here another road that will be named, for example, let's also add here slash. So for example, out test, and let's type here just function to test this road and return success out. Okay, so that's all. Let's open Postman, and first let's try to access post road without token, and I will get again and I will get again message that I am not authorized. So if I type token, I have access to this and to all this data. So remember, that's the way how you can make authorization by using API in your application and using Sanctum package. And now let's try to access out test. And as you can see, success out. So that means that our authorization works, as you remember, because you can get token by using login. And somebody can ask question, whoa, but if I want to make registration, will I need to use some special packages or functions? No, you will need to just save your data in the database, and that's all. So that was maybe short lesson, but I showed you how you can use Sanctum for authorization, and also how you can basically build your application by using resources and requests. So that's all for this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and soon you're gonna see more videos by me about Laravel.